You know what's strange? One whole generation was told they were exceptional, pushed themselves harder than anyone expected, and still ended up unable to afford a life that felt normal just one generation earlier. That's a psychological experiment nobody agreed to join. I'm talking about millennials, those born from 1981 to 1996. Before you sigh, stay with me. This gets uncomfortable in ways you may not have considered. Millennials became the first generation in modern American history expected to do worse financially than their parents. This was confirmed in 2020. So now there's an entire group carrying a strange mental mix of achievement and failure in their heads every single day. Picture this. You grow up hearing you can be anything, win anything, become anything. Then you graduate into a recession where the participation trophy turns into a master's degree that costs more than a house once did. That clash has a name, cognitive dissonance, and millennials are drowning in it. But this runs deeper than student debt or avocado toast jokes. Psychologist Jean Twenge even wrote a book called Generation Me about this exact pattern. Her research showed that millennials score higher on narcissism than earlier generations. But here's the twist. They also score higher on anxiety and depression. So you end up with a generation that feels both special and completely inadequate at the same time. A trauma response with a LinkedIn profile. Sit with that timeline for a moment. Millennials were the first real test group for every parenting trend born out of the self-esteem movement of the 80s and 90s. Helicopter parenting. Everyone gets a trophy. You're amazing just for showing up. These ideas came from good intentions and the best psychology available at the time. Then their 20s hit right as the economy collapsed in 2008. They entered a job market that no longer worked the way it used to. Overnight, they were forced to live in an economic reality they were never prepared for. That shock alone was brutal. And then there was social media. Millennials encountered it during their teenage and young adult years, not as kids like Gen Z, but while their identities were still taking shape. Facebook launched in 2004. Instagram followed in 2010. That meant millennials learned how to be adults while also learning how to perform their lives for an audience. Research by Dr. Tim Kasser shows that when people tie their self-worth to external approval, exactly what social media encourages, mental health drops fast. You're basically running a non-stop campaign for your own existence, and the polls never shut down. Add to that the fact that millennials are postponing or skipping the life milestones that once defined adulthood. Marriage, buying a home, having children. Surveys show they want these things, but the economy makes them nearly unreachable without family money or extreme luck. So now you have people in their 30s and 40s who feel like real life hasn't started yet. The waiting room is a tiny apartment with a $2,200 rent. Their therapist is booked until March. And the effects of long-term uncertainty are well documented. When the markers of adulthood become out of reach, your brain doesn't just adapt and move on. It creates constant, low-level stress. It's called allostatic load. Your body stays on standby for something that never arrives. Like being stuck on the loading screen of your own life, watching the progress bar sit frozen for years. Now here's where it gets personal. Millennials were sold a very clear promise about effort and reward. Work hard, go to college, get a good job, move up. That deal made sense. It had worked for decades. But the economic ground shifted in ways no one fully predicted. When millennials stepped in, ready to follow the rules, college cost 10 times more than before. Entry-level jobs demanded years of experience. And they were handed $70,000 in debt, plus a gig economy with no benefits. The term for when reality shatters your core beliefs about how the world works is schema disruption. When this happens to an entire generation, the result isn't just frustration. It's a full reset in how people relate to institutions, authority, and the idea of a stable future. That's why millennials are often described as idealistic and deeply cynical at the same time. They still believe things should be fair. They just don't believe they will be. That's pattern recognition at work. And the job thing. Millennials get dragged constantly for job hopping and lacking company loyalty. But here's what's interesting. Corporate America changed the rules of employment long before millennials did. Pensions vanished. Full-time roles turned into contract work. Mass layoffs became standard business practice. Millennials didn't create this lack of loyalty. They adjusted to a job market that had already shifted. A logical response to a system that treats workers as replaceable. There's another side that doesn't get enough attention. Millennials are also one of the most educated and most diverse generations in history. Yet when people describe them, they often jump straight to teen internet culture. They grew up online. That shapes a very specific mindset, one that questions everything because they've seen how truth changes depending on who's telling the story. People who challenge the status quo often get called entitled or difficult. But that's what critical thinking looks like when it runs into systems that were never meant to be questioned. The mental health conversation shifted too. Millennials were the first generation to openly normalize therapy and talk about anxiety and depression as real issues, not personal flaws. That matters. But it's happening while they live under objectively higher stress. Student debt levels that once seemed impossible, housing costs racing far ahead of wages, job insecurity built into the modern economy. So they end up more self-aware and more overwhelmed at the same time. And let's talk about the future for a moment. Millennials are also the generation watching the planet visibly decline while being told they're responsible for fixing it, all while having less power and fewer resources to make change at the scale required. Existential dread paired with helplessness. Climate anxiety is now a recognized psychological issue, and millennials sit right in the middle of it. So what you're left with is a generation shaped by extreme expectations, economic instability, constant pressure to perform, delayed adulthood, and a front-row seat to overlapping crises. Then society turns around and asks, "Why are you so anxious? Why don't you just buy a house?" When you look at what they've lived through, the psychology of millennials becomes very predictable. They're responding exactly how humans do when the ground shifts beneath them, and the map they were given no longer matches reality. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. I genuinely appreciate it.